As president, he goes back as president, the first African-American president, to where his father was born. I mean, doesn't that stand alone as well as just as significant?
The White House press briefing dedicating quite a considerable amount of time to the trip by President Barack Obama to Kenya. The National Security Advisor Susan Rice answering all the questions that the journalists heard on this trip. Take a look.
So before I take your questions, let me just tell you a little bit about each day on the trip. On Saturday, the 25th of July, the president's trip will start in earnest on Saturday morning, where he'll open up the 6th annual Global Entrepreneurship Summit, co-hosted by the U.S. and Kenya. I expect the president will have an opportunity also to pay tribute to the victims and the survivors of the 1998 embassy bombing, which targeted our embassy not only in Nairobi but also in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Saturday, the Kenyan government will host the president for a bilateral program, including a meeting and press conference and state dinner. On Sunday, the president will deliver remarks to the Kenyan people. We'll have additional details on the thrust of his remarks in the coming days, but you can expect him to speak to the broad themes in our relationship with Kenya and its people. The president will also take part in a civil society event to highlight civil society's contributions to development, prosperity, and democratic institutions in Kenya. And he will open the event with remarks and engage in a discussion with civil society participants, primarily around the topics of wildlife trafficking, girls' education, and countering violent extremism. And later in the day on Sunday, we'll head to Ethiopia. When it comes to his time in Kenya, the president will honor the strong historical ties between the United States and Kenya. Choosing Kenya as the destination for the Global Entrepreneurship Summit underscores the fact that the United States, that Africa and Kenya in particular has become a center for innovation and entrepreneurship. The Global Entrepreneurship Summit will highlight the president's commitment to promoting entrepreneurship globally, particularly opportunities for women and girls. Our time in Kenya will also underscore Nairobi's strong leadership on regional security issues, its impressive record of economic growth and competitive democratic system, as well as the challenges that Kenya obviously still faces in countering violent extremism, ensuring respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. The upcoming travel will go a long distance as well to advance our trade and investment relationship with Africa, as well as our continued work to help African governments strengthen their business environment and their capacity for regional and global trade. In this regard, the President will lift up the recent 10-year renewal of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which we'll also celebrate here tonight at the White House, and we'll note what a strong signal that sends to our African partners that we're serious about expanding and sustaining U.S.-Africa trade, including by helping to create new customers for U.S. businesses overseas. Congress's bipartisan support for this legislation allowed us to secure AGOA's renewal, and the President, as he has on past trips, has invited a number of House and Senate members to join him. I won't speak for the President. I think he'll have an opportunity to hear from him during the course of the trip about his personal ties to Kenya. I do know that he's very much looking forward to both the stops on this trip. And obviously when you go to a country where you have familial ties and you're a sitting president, it's a different deal than when you're going as a private citizen or even as a United States senator. So there are certain constraints, not only of time, but of logistics that limit what he might do in a different context. But I'm quite confident that he's looking forward to the trip and the opportunity to spend some time in private with some of his relatives.
Anita.
Yeah, I'm actually just going to follow up on that. You said he would spend some time with relatives. Can you just expand on that? Will they come visit him? Will he go somewhere? Will he go to his family's village?
Will the bear be on the loose? I'm not going to get into details on the logistics except to say that I do believe he'll have an opportunity to spend some time
privately with members of his family. I think some members of his family will also be invited to some of the public events or the larger state-sponsored events, including perhaps the dinner. It is a fact that he is not going to be able to visit the village most closely associated with his family for a combination of time and logistical reasons, among others. But nonetheless, I know that he looks forward to having the opportunity to reach out to and have some time with family, as any of us would.
Suzanne?
Yeah, it's come to light that Kenyan Airlines has actually published the president's schedule in detail regarding the two major airports, both arrival and departure, not only among its staff, but also it's been published on Facebook. Is this a breach in security protocol? Is there any concern about security measures in light of this kind of widespread information that is now out to the public regarding very specifically his schedule?
My understanding, Suzanne, is that the Secret Service is well aware of this. It has in no way affected our approach to or plans for the trip. And it's also my understanding that oftentimes some of this information turns out to be not entirely accurate. But I don't think it in any way is disturbing our plans. Yes, I think we would say that the president of Kenya was democratically elected. That was a competitive process.
Yesterday, that Kenya's president said that gay rights was a non-issue in his country and that it was definitely not on the agenda with the president. It was 2 years ago in Senegal, President Obama was very forceful about protecting gay rights. There are already warnings from inside Kenya, from politicians, media outlets, for the president not to address it as bluntly or as openly as he did before. Is it on the agenda? Is it something that he is thinking about in terms of the balance between recognizing the sovereignty of Kenya and also promoting gay rights?
Well, Suzanne, I think, as you know, this is not for us an issue of Africa or any other or any country in Africa. This is an issue of universal human rights. And President Obama feels very strongly, as do all of us in the administration, that gay rights are human rights. And whether we're in Washington, D.C., or somewhere in Asia or in Africa, that is something that we do not shy away from underscoring, as the president did during his last trip to Africa and many other parts of the world. So this is not something that we think is a topic we reserve for certain parts of the world and not others. If appropriate, I have no doubt that the president will feel perfectly free to raise his concerns. We always, not just in Africa, but around the world, when we are traveling to countries where we have concerns about the rule of law, human rights, corruption, whatever, democratic governance, we make those concerns known, publicly and privately. And we have done so continuously in the case of these two countries, and will continue to do so. I think our interest is not in some gesture necessarily tied to the trip, but in lasting change which is sustained over time that benefits the people of these countries.
Dylan?
It's kind of astounding that no American president has visited Kenya before now.
Sitting, yes.
Yeah, sitting president. How do
Or
you answer?
Ethiopia, which is, one of the largest countries in East Africa and on the continent.
But you hear a lot about the historic relationship between the U.S. and Kenya. So what can you say about why that is?
I can't answer that.
Why didn't Bill Clinton go?
I'm not sure why we didn't go to Ethiopia or Kenya. I think one strong thing about Ethiopia that was less the case back then is the African Union, which back then was the Organization of African Unity, has come into its own and become a very strong force for unity and progress, frankly, on the continent. And so our partnership with the African Union has definitely strengthened and deepened. It's been under this administration that we appointed an ambassador to the African Union. And in many ways, the strength and importance of that relationship has changed. We've always had an interest in Ethiopia's progress, particularly after the end of the Derg. We had secretaries of state in the Clinton administration who went to Ethiopia and to Kenya, of course. But we did not have the opportunity for President Clinton to go. He took 2 trips to Africa, as you'll recall. First one in 1998, where he went to, I think, 6 countries. And then a subsequent one where it was a shorter trip where he just went to 2.
About the president's personal connection to this trip to Kenya, how did the idea for this trip arise? Is this something that the president has been wanting to do for a while? And is this in any way a personal pilgrimage for him?
I wouldn't describe it that way, and I think for reasons that the president alluded to in his news conference last week. Traveling to Kenya as a private citizen was a very different experience for him than traveling to Kenya as the President of the United States. That the security precautions and logistical challenges of traveling as President will prevent him from visiting the village with whom where his familial ties are the strongest. That is something that he was able to do as a private citizen. But he will not be able to do that this time around. I think, based on the way the president wrote about his first trip to Africa in his book, I think he probably could describe that as a personal pilgrimage of the president. This trip will be materially different. I don't want to leave you with the impression that the president's not looking forward to it. He certainly is, both for personal reasons, but also for the important policy reasons that Susan discussed when she was out here. But the personal impact of this trip will be much different than the personal impact of the trip the president took, or the trips that the president has taken as a private citizen.
Can I follow up on Christy's question, following up on my question?
You can do one more, and then we'll do.
Okay. No, but the issue is, and I heard the president when he said, being a private citizen versus being in the bubble as president, but aren't both significant in their own right? Each one could stand alone significantly. He was a private citizen, free to roam and do what he wanted to do in his father's homeland. But then, as president, he goes back as president, the first African-American president, to where his father was born. Doesn't that stand alone as well as just as significant as being a private citizen traveling?
Well, April, the trip will be significant, in no small part because it's the first visit by any sitting U.S. president to Kenya, as Susan mentioned. There are important policy priorities that will be discussed. Some of them are related to the economy. Some of them are related to counterterrorism and security issues. These are important priorities, and the president believes that it will be a worthwhile trip because of that. There's no denying that the fact that the president is traveling to the country where his father was born is important and makes it different than other important foreign trips that the president has taken. That being said, the expectation that all of us have, and I think the expectation that the president has, is that the kind of personal time that he'll take when he's there will not be nearly as significant or as impactful as his previous trips.
BMJ Muriithi, NTV, Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States.